moccasins, and snowshoes. I am pleased that that we have two wonderful speakers today, which I will leave to Antoine Gagnon to introduce to them. But I just want to acknowledge that these presenter series are really a great opportunity for learning and sharing about Indigenous cultures, art, and history. Thank you, merci, and nawai. Antoine?
Thank you so much, Carmen. I'd like to take a minute to thank everyone for coming this morning. We really appreciate it. Come and celebrate with us National Indigenous History Month. And I want to give a special thank you also to our amazing speakers this morning that have accepted to come to share their knowledge and experience about Turtle Island with us. And so with no further ado, I would like to make introductions to Jessie and Dakota Brant, who are Mohawk Nation twin sister from Ohswé and are the co-founders of the jewelry company Sapling Flint, a retail and wholesale jewelry manufacturer specializing in gold and sterling silver that has sold across Canada, the USA, Western Europe, Japan, and even Korea. Silversmithing has a 400-year tradition in the Haudenosaunee communities, beginning with the introduction of trade silver by traders. And so with no further ado, if you can Jessie and Dakota, if you want to start your presentation, we thank you so much for coming, and we'll let the microphone to you.
There you go. Can you see and hear us?
Yes.
First, okay, all right, good.
Sure can.
Yeah, how many participants we got? Sego, goego from, if everybody's from everywhere. My name is Dakota Brant, and along with my twin sister Jessie, we're co-founders of Sapling Flint. We've been in business since 2017, you know, creating career opportunities here in Six Nations with in relation to metallurgy. And you know, silversmithing has a 400-year history among Haudenosaunee people and Indigenous people all across Turtle Island. And we're really lucky and happy and fortunate to be able to just, you know, have that base or that foundation for our own creative arts and just expanding into metallurgy ourselves. Yeah. And so there's a couple of things that we're going to do. I'll be sharing our screen. So I'm Dakota, that was Jessie, just so you know who's who. Yeah. So we'll kind of be bouncing back and forth and just bouncing off of each other in terms of our speaking. And I don't mind when if people want to ask questions during the presentation, but Antoine, I think maybe if people just put the questions in the chat, maybe Antoine can manage that, or just let us know questions as they come along.
Absolutely. If anybody writes in the chat throughout the presentation, we'll make sure to address your question. I'm taking a look at the chat at the end of the presentation. So don't worry about that, Dakota and Jessie. I'll keep an eye on that.
Okay, because I'm always happy to answer questions. The reason, like during presentations, I do like to answer them sometimes because sometimes it helps me know if I'm talking about the thing you want me to talk about. Yeah. You know, but we're pretty you know, off call for whatever when it comes to questions. But if there's some simple questions for during the presentation, like we're happy to clarify.
Sounds
and
good.
Then otherwise for the most at the end of it as well. So there's two things that we're going to do. We'll be sharing a presentation and we'll also be sharing a YouTube video. And I just want to get us over to our PowerPoint presentation, if I can share that. Silversmithing. And so these are the pictures in the middle are some really traditional versions of Luck and Booth brooches. And on the right is a pair of earrings that are designed by Jessie, and we sell them here. It's some of our products. And but they're earrings that have been fashioned to represent that original Luck and Booth design that we'll definitely talk about as we move along in the presentation. And so it's an annular piece brooch. I don't want to hang on to this one, this presentation. This is just a breakdown presentation of our presentation, what we'll be talking about today. Native copper, ancient silversmithing, really talking about that chronology of events for silversmithing and metallurgy among Haudenosaunee people, all the way up until the present day. And a little bit of the land acknowledgement that we wanted to share, like, oh, McGill, during Indigenous History Month, we thought we would share our own land acknowledgement that in 1847, Six Nations monies were withdrawn from the government of Canada at that time, representing $8,000. They were sent to McGill College with no record of repayment. So when we're talking, you know, you have Mohawk people that'll say that McGill University is Mohawk land, and this is a part of that reason that McGill University and a lot of the institutions that that are those 200, 250, 300-year-old institutions in Canada, including Upper Canada and Lower Canada. People kind of have this idea that, Britain was just there being the piggy bank for Canada to bankroll the foundation of this country. And that's not true. It's simply not the case. Six Nations has 29 or 30 different land claims, not including the transfers of lands and monies that have no record of repayment. And McGill's an example of one of those. And so $8,000 in 1847 monies, if that was our band council here, our lands and research department, decide we're trying to value that in modern day, if that was something that was going to be paid back, accruing standard interest. They have some values there of at 6% interest. It's going to be over $106 million today. And so just let you know, when you're at McGill University, Mohawks built that university into what it is today, and it was with Mohawk money. Switch through here, the slides. Oh, there we go. So a little bit about us. I guess we shared this introduction already. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your silversmithing background, Jessie.
I am Jessie, and I am a trained goldsmith. I did the jewelry arts and design program at George Brown College in Toronto. I graduated 14 years ago. I am still always learning. There are silversmiths in our community. And also in my training, I wasn't able to have the opportunity to learn lapidary work. So I do work with wampum. I cut my own wampum, but I had to learn that skill set from elders and my own mentors in my community. So when we talk about trade silver and just Haudenosaunee metallurgy in general, there is contemporary artists. We are actively doing it today, and that's just what I want to portray in this presentation today. So we have historical inspiration in our designs at Sapling and Flint, as well as our own design inspirations that me and Dakota both take part in. Dakota is very creative. I'm the one that puts it into, imaginates everything in, puts it in and put it into the metal work that we do. So we do specialize in gold as well.
Okay. And these are just some samples of some of our products. You're more than welcome to check us out on social media. It's Sapling and Flint. We're on Instagram, probably our biggest one, Facebook, and we have our own website, saplingandflint.ca. If you want to just learn more about our company, but I didn't want to spend too much time on us. I just wanted to say who we were. But these are some of the products. Again, we do have inspiration coming from our own culture and our metallurgy history, but we also carry contemporary designs as well. And then from there, like I said before, like Jessie is a trained metallurgist. She understands how to manipulate metal, and we do have a YouTube channel, Sapling and Flint, that you can visit, where we do upload videos occasionally for Jessie to actually share a bit of like how she might go by creating replicas of traditional works, but and then a lot of the works that she does already too. But in this video, it's an 8-minute video. We're going to share it right now. It's basically Jessie recreating how she would do a replica trade brooch. And so we just wanted to share that. And so I think I gotta flipping through everything here. I'm gonna switch my screen to YouTube. And so we're just gonna share this short video together. It's got music. If you don't like the music, you can turn it down.
Yeah. So it starts right from the ingot. I had to melt down scrap metal just to make this piece. But this is a replica piece of something that's inspired from 17th or 18th century trade silver.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm worrying about putting the brooch back on it. So we're not doing a classic brooch pin on it because this is for a customer and they're hoping to have it as use a more modern pin back that you can put on a regular shirt. So I did do some pre-polishing just to so I don't have to do a whole lot of polishing after the soldering process, and I don't have to worry so much about the stamping work that I've done. So right now I have used a set square. So this is my set square, and I used it to make a straight line with my scribe. So I've marked out with the scribe and punched in where I'm going to put the brooch pins. So this is the clasp or the hinge, I guess, for the brooch back, and this is the clasp that's going to catch it. So I have pre-soldered hard solder on it. I had to use hard solder just because it's a clasp that's going to be used a lot, right? So you want a nice good solder joint. So on the top here, I'm going to be using putting the hinge side. So that's what's going to go down. I just need to set myself up for that now.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
That's fine. Sorry, I had us on mute. But making sure so everybody can see us again.
We hear you, but do you think you could raise your volume a little bit?
Okay. Oh, that needs a microphone. Maybe talk louder. Not really sure if I can.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Go right ahead.
Yeah.
We are in a plaza, like our gallery, so and there happens to be like a Brink truck in front of the bank right now. So if you hear something, it's that.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Let's see. Okay. I think I know what we're doing now. Okay, can everybody see our screen? The PowerPoint?
No, we cannot.
Oh, I guess I have
There
to
we
share
go.
my
Yes,
screen.
now
Yeah,
we
we do now. Thank you.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. The technology. Okay, so what you saw there is basically how Jesse might go about trying to create a replica piece when a customer comes to us and asks for a replica piece of trade silver, and that's Haudenosaunee metallurgy or silversmithing at work. So the silversmiths that that's when they're working in their studios, that's what it is that they're doing. And we do use modern tools today. We do customize it to what the clients are looking for. In the video, you saw that Jesse custom made a pin back, but like a modern pin back in the video. And so like the older classic pin backs in the old days that they would use,
They're very wide and they're very sharp.
Yeah.
The fact that they're wide is that they would just ruin like a modern or a shirt today if you want to wear it multiple times. So the way we make brooch pins these days is from wire, not from sheet metal. that's what I can see. That's what I see from historical pieces is it's hammered out and then filed into a really sharp kind of piece from a sheet metal, almost like the tip of a knife. But now we have wire and we're able to sharpen wires, and it's not going to ruin a garment if you're going to wear it excessively.
So to make a point about silversmithing or any kind of smithing in general, it is not a new or a post-contact form of art or utilitarian work for Indigenous people in the Americas. We do have a long-standing history of smithing on Turtle Island, especially among Haudenosaunee people here in the Northeast, Algonquins and Anishinaabe. The Wendat people, we did have a history of smithing even before contact. And our metal of choice, we use what was available to us, and for us in this area, it was the indigenous copper. And so a lot of the copper that you see in they have archaeological digs that are happening
Even today, it's happening to find copper pieces and beads specifically.
Yeah. And so a lot of that copper is coming from, I guess there is a lot of copper, traditional or like old ancient copper mines even in the Northeast, but a lot of the copper metal came from this Lake Superior area, and so that's where those ancestral trade routes were taking place and happening for us to get that copper to our area. And so in this picture here, that top right, you see that big rock that's just kind of there randomly in the middle of the woods. That's a piece of almost pure copper, like a giant boulder of copper. And what's so even the intrinsic value of metallurgy. Oh, go ahead, get some. Okay, sorry, I got a customer coming in just now. But even the intrinsic value of native copper is the fact that it has such a high content of purity. So like if you're going to get native copper, like out at mines in and around Lake Superior, what was great about it for ancient silversmithing, or ancient smithing, not silversmithing, was that they had to do very little to actually change the metal, the pure state of it coming out of the ground. It was almost pure copper, so it was very easy to eventually manipulate without the use of heat. So copper is a very soft metal. It's non-ferrous. And so, hang on a second. Sorry, Jesse's talking to a customer right now, just kind of distracted me. So we do run a business here too. We have people coming in and out, like clients are coming in for custom work. We can't really stop for them. But anyways, okay, she's back. And so these pieces, it's just so like incredible when you go to Lake Superior and you just see like these almost pure deposits of copper, and the fact that it was, it's a soft metal. We didn't really have to heat it in order to separate it from other metals or something. Like it was just kind of came out of the ground and was ready to use. Mm-hmm. And so I like that picture in the bottom right there where it has that green, that natural native copper, but somebody took it and split it in half and shined it up, and I think they use them as to hold books. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. You open it up and just see how pure the content of copper is, where that was readily accessible to our ancient coppersmiths in this territory here. I don't know. In the top middle there, like I had this quote from Beecham that says the earliest metallic earrings in use in New York, so in Haudenosaunee territory, were probably those of copper wire that was coiled and flattened. And so I found that quote, and then unrelated, I found these pictures at the top. So you see like those sketches of copper wire earrings found in Pompeii, New York. And I just thought that was really interesting to just be able to define like an archaeological book about the copper wire, but then also have Beecham in a different place, like describe what it is that he's seeing copper wire metal coiled and flattened, but then to see a picture of how that might look. And so I thought that those were really interesting to see. And so copper was going to be the jewelry of choice when it comes to metal, like pre-contact, but it was what our ancient smiths were working with up until about the 1600s. And so a lot of the fashion that when you think today, what silver and brass that we might wear, like our belt buckles, our armbands, our bracelets, our earrings, like everything, single style of something that you can think of that we wear in terms of metal. Those are styles that go back even to pre-contact. 1500s is just, the only thing that's changed is the metal. And also the development of our understanding of how to manipulate metal, especially using heat and soldering. And so those are the things that have changed, but our people have always had a joy of wearing metal for art and jewelry. And so so you can just see these descriptions of gorgets, bracelets, bangles, headbands, like it was already there in terms of our way of wanting to adorn ourselves. Just the type of metal is what changed over time. And so by about the year 1600, by the 1600s, you saw a lot of the native copper trade being replaced by like these really shiny new metals, which was brass and silver as well. If there's anyone to add to this slide or.
I don't think so. I can talk a little more about the how it would have been made a little later on though in the presentation. I'll get to that.
Pieces.
Yeah.
So these are some pieces here that I know that they were excavated from Haudenosaunee territory on the right, like these black and white I don't know if they're sketches. they're from an old book. And so like I can carry, like we have our sources that we can share, but what I thought was really interesting of them is that these are all copper, so that and you do have that brass plate from Pompeii, New York, but a lot of the copper would have been, native copper or something that was being created by like a native silver smith as opposed to a native jeweler as opposed to a white jeweler. And so the pieces that you're seeing are genuinely, things that would have been made without the use of soldering, without the use of like, this is even before people were using files and saws to cut things. And so that serrated copper bracelet, like that looks really interesting to me. And I was like, how would they come up with a style like that without saws? But then Jesse was telling me that like flint.
Yeah, just like there's not a whole lot of documentation as to how this metallurgy was done, but there is a lot of evidence of that it was done, just like that you can see in these pictures, the bangles and the serrated copper bracelets are interesting to me because they didn't have iron tools like files and hammers and whatnot. So what they could have done is, since copper is a very soft metal, that means it's very manipulative and it's very malleable. So they could have used like rocks, like especially flint in particular. Flint it's a very hard rock. You can only use flint to manipulate flint historically. Nowadays we have lots of lapidary equipment we can use. So I can imagine that maybe flint was sharpened edges of flint was used to hammer something a metal flat, and even to make those serrated textures done in those bangles, using it like a file, just filing it in. That's something that I hope I can find a little more material on as to how this metallurgy was done. But just from my point of view, not using copper or not having iron tools, especially at the time, even saw blades, and I think flint would have been a really prominent rock to use because it's such a hard material.
Yeah. So I have written on here like the locations of where these items were excavated. So Rome, New York, which is Oneida; Geneva, New York, which is, I think ancestrally it was Seneca, but today we might consider it Cayuga territory. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's where those pieces were made. It just means that that's where they were found. So copper, any kind of jewelry that was being made, there was a prolific trade even pre-contact. These pieces would have been made in one village and traded, very far, or gifted far great distances. So we can't necessarily know where they were made, but just finding them, it does give that idea of what what our people valued aesthetically at a certain period in our history. And so on the left here, this colored picture in the top, this triangle shape in the top left, this isn't, I kind of aligned it with this quote that's below it. The bangles produced by the natives were 3/4 of an inch in length, bell-shaped, and were fastened to the fringe of a garment and made a very pleasant tinkling sound as the wearer danced. This type of bangle and all types of beads were worn by the Iroquois, and most burials prior to 1680 contained them. This piece isn't what they're describing in this picture, in the quote. I just figured it's kind of the closest picture I could find to what this person is describing in this quote, in terms of just like that bell shape of a bangle. When they say bangle, I think they're just talking about that are basically attached to clothing. And what I really liked about this quote was the fact that they're talking about the purpose of it, which was to fasten to a fringe of a garment, and it made a pleasant sound when dancing. And and putting a time period onto it, which is prior to the 1680s, it reminded me that we still value this exact purpose for beads and bangles today among Haudenosaunee people. You know, like our men wear deer toes around their like fastened to their knees. They'll wear bells around their ankles. Even like Anishinaabe people have the jingle dress with the cones. Like the idea of sound being just as much a part of your regalia as the look and aesthetic. It's always been very important and highly valued to our people. And I just thought that was so interesting to just read this article and just see if that's something that's almost inherent in our regalia across time. The sound of our regalia is a timeless piece, and metal in this case was a big part of it even pre-contact. You know, we think today like, oh, application of silver and bells and trade brooches and anything that made a sound to our regalia now. I'm like, that's actually something that's was a part of our value even pre-contact, in the introduction of new metals besides native copper.
That is interesting, because contemporarily a bangle is a bracelet that's closed, and we call it, that's what a bracelet, an enclosed bracelet is today. But when you think about it, a long time historically, when bracelets were worn, there were many bracelets that were worn and it would bang together. So I'm wondering, Dakota mentioned that, she's like, maybe that's where that comes from. We call a bangle today a bangle because they used to adorn them and they would bang together and make a noise.
Yeah, and so these pieces that you're seeing here that are excavated and that we know that are native copper, and we're looking at them in terms of their aesthetic value, except for that brass plate down there. It's kind of unrelated, but it was on the same page of the book that I was taking this picture from. All of this is basically wrought out by cold hammering. So that means that the copper was in no way heated. And so these pieces were created or done without the use of crucible or soldering. So there was no heat used in the creation or manufacture of these pieces. And again, copper being a soft metal, it was easy to manipulate even with stone tools to be able to create these things. And when I say stone, like I don't mean like just like a big flintstone-y looking rock. Like flint in our territory, which was highly valued in any indigenous territory, it's sharp. It has a surgical precision to it. It's very strong. It could be a tool that could have been used easily to do finer cuts, again, like these serrated looking bracelets.
Sharp enough to use as a fire starter.
Yeah, to use
to
as
make a spark.
Use as awl to create holes for perforating metal. Let's see. So getting into after our ancient smithing is getting into the fur trade, or that introduction of other metals to Haudenosaunee, so our territory. When we talk metal silversmithing, we can talk generally about indigenous silversmithing, but like me and Jesse's perspective is just a Haudenosaunee one. Like I can't tell you what silversmithing is going to be like, or metallurgy. The work with metal is going to be like for Anishinaabe people, Algonquin, Huron-Wendat. We can have some vague ideas, but like our perspective is really just it's a Haudenosaunee or a Mohawk one, growing up here in Grand River. But that being said, the fur trade and how it influenced the I guess the evolution of jewelry in and among us Haudenosaunee people, it was significant. It was impactful. It introduced us to things like brass and zinc and pewter and lead and all these other metals that we know that Mohawk jewelers were creating pieces out of. And so when we think fur trade, you got to think of it in two kind of three different areas. From like, you got the French and the English, which I have here on this slide, but I also don't want to forget the Dutch, because the Dutch were the first people that we worked with. And we didn't necessarily, like when it came to the prolific use of metal or looking at jewelry in relation to trade, that really came around with the French and then the English. And so the French, you can kind of look at their history split up in two when it came to trade, or people that we were basically seeing traversing our territories. That courrier de bois are basically the same thing as voyageurs. And so, but they're two different things. Like think about courrier de bois as being pre-voyageur and unregulated voyageur. So, so around the 1650s, you had a lot of people who were this courrier de bois, but they weren't necessarily all French. They could have been, there were a lot of Scottish people, a lot of Irish. There were just a lot of people who were they started their time in the New World as new immigrants. A lot of them were indentured servants, but they came here with this sense of freedom that they just never experienced in the old world, in the country that they came from. To come here and just realize, like you're allowed to, you can drink out of the water, you can hunt a deer without being charged for treason. Like, it's illegal to hunt deer, and like in England at the time, it was like it was illegal to hunt a deer. They were all the deer in the country were the property of the king. And then to come here and to suddenly have this unregulated freedom, like it gave them this like it brought out the adventure in them, and to come here to the New World and to have all these new experiences. And so at the beginning of the fur trade, you had these men who were had this early on sense of freedom for the first time in generations of their families, looking for opportunity. And so those particular from the French perspective, those men had a lot of early on success because the French up in Canada had closer proximity to a lot of the trade that was happening. So they're the ones that created the very first French trading post, which was just at Tadoussac. Well, I'll talk a little bit about that later. Closer proximity to really good trade routes, but then they also just had better relations with indigenous groups. There was a lot of intermarriage. These are the people that you're thinking about when you're talking about the beginnings of the Métis people. A lot of intermarriage was happening, and so the attitude from a French perspective up in the French policy around relationships with indigenous people was a lot more progressive at the time than it was the English. And so two big companies that were part of trade was the first one was the Hudson's Bay Company, which was English founded. It was founded in London. And then the Northwest Company was created in 1779 to kind of be the competition for Hudson's Bay Company, because Hudson's Bay had an absolute monopoly on the fur trade up to that time. So the Northwest Company, it opened up the Northwest, like what we would think of as Western Canada at that time, which was the Great Lakes. And so they created a lot of investment into creating that main route from Montreal to Lake Ontario. But then they started building and maintaining trade posts all around the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and Lake Superior. And so that initial investment by the Northwest Company into those trade routes is really what opened up Western Canada. But then by around the early 1800s, so you see that the Northwest Company, its founding dates are 1779 to 1820. They were eventually sold and amalgamated into the Hudson's Bay Company because they did have an economic collapse. There was over-harvesting at the time. They were greatly impacted. Some of their trades posts were destroyed during the War of 1812. And so there was a number of factors that came down to like the economic demise of the Northwestern Company, but it was ultimately, they still had over 48, I think, trading posts at the time of their amalgamation into Hudson's Bay Company. And then so the Hudson's Bay Company, they already had almost 80 trading posts themselves. So they just basically absorbed the Northwest Company after that. But that being said, the Northwest Company was the one that really opened up what was considered Western Canada at the time, which was the Great Lakes, for the Hudson's Bay Company to really get up into that area and basically, do better, increase the monopoly that they had. Again, this is the early on advantage I'm talking about of the French when introducing themselves into the fur trade, which ultimately was the beginnings of like trade silver being traded with Haudenosaunee people. So, our indigenous people in general, where they would go get get furs, and they would come to these trading posts like the Northwest Company, Hudson's Bay Company. And so the French were kind of the early on in terms of their advantages, but later on, when you think of policies and how the New World was treated by the various colonies, so that was the French colony. The English, when they created their colonies, they were more focused on, I guess, regulation. Like they were building a foundation for themselves. So a lot of the French trade, like all the items that they thought were going to be of value at these trading posts, they were heavily reliant on ships coming up to bring those products. And they didn't just come from France. They went all over Europe trying to find what they thought could be of use to trade. England, on the other hand, the English colonies, they did create a lot of the products over in Europe, but they mostly came from Britain. So you got porcelain, textiles, those kind of things that couldn't necessarily be made early on in the New World. But England was also interested in regulation. So remember when I was talking about that freedom that the Courrier de Bois had at the very beginning? That, as nice as that freedom is for the individual, it didn't help in terms of the market value. So there was a lot of unregulation. So there, some people were selling pelts like very, very expensively, and some of them were, very cheap. And so like that unregulation wasn't going to be helping anybody when it came to keeping and maintaining customers, especially when a customer knew that when they went to an English post, no matter where they went, they were going to get the same value for the pelt. So there was that aspect to it too. So the English were better at kind of forcing the hand of the French market to create more standardization and regulation in their pricing system, but then also the quality of the products as well. When we talk about trade silver, a lot of what the English were making, they were focused on kind of like manufacturing things that they knew that the certain indigenous groups would like. So the fur trade, that's kind of something that they noticed early on too, is that, they might make something that would be of high value to one indigenous group, but it might be of little to no value to another. So they focused on kind of what those interests were, and in a way that just kind of wasn't adopted early on enough by the French, in terms of just being able to be more prolific with trade. So when we think of fur trade early on, you have a lot of French advantage. Even before them, you have Dutch advantage, and that's going on to the early 1600s. But then later on, the advantage is going to the English colonies. And then ultimately there was the French and English, war for dominion over Canada, over North America, and England won that war. So a lot of the French investment into the New World was removed. And so that's, where you get Lower Canada from. They're the descendants of that early on French investment into the New World. So next slide. Did I talk about a lot of this already? Yeah, talked about this already. French obtained their items from various European sources. England had the Hudson's Bay Company, which was providing items manufactured primarily in Britain, but then later on from other European and Near East countries. And that's like, start thinking about England creating colonies in other countries around the world. They were taking and extracting from those colonies items that they thought were going to be of value, and those came into the New World. So England was building on their trade routes in a way that was just kind of like light years ahead of what the French were doing at the time, and creating a trade system among all their colonies that was going to be more rigid at the time. And then eventually North American made, so that's another thing that the English were investing in, was not just bringing all their silver from England, but as soon as they set up shop in colonies, they were trying to set up every profession they could. So they were creating blacksmiths, watchmakers, jewelers, silversmiths, and so that they could do as much industry as they could in the New World without having to rely heavily on ships coming to bring all of their supplies. And so they had that early on investment that the French didn't necessarily have. Just a little, really quick here. I didn't want to spend too much time on this. Just to say, give you a sense of where trade was happening early on. So the oldest trade route, the very first trading post, is that Tadoussac at 1599. So you can see at the top right, that's the Gulf of the St. Lawrence River, the St. Lawrence, and then you can see the French posts are popping up all along the St. Lawrence, whereas you have the colony, the 13 colonies, they're down further to the south. But I wasn't going to spend a bunch of time on this one. I kind of talked about it a lot already, but I just wanted to give a sense of the geography of what I'm talking about here, and then just how the geography opened up over time. So Tadoussac was founded in 1599, but you look all the way close to Toronto, where you have Fort Niagara, was built in 1727. That was considered the absolute frontier, Western Canada at that time period, 1727, when the Fort Niagara has had four different nations' flags, but they were initially built by the French. And so that it was the first Western stone fort built. But just to give you a sense of time period wise, the movement of French all across the landscape. And so they were the first ones to kind of make that active attempt at dominion in the West. And so 1727 is leading up to that time of that, the French Indian Wars and over dominance of the New World. And eventually Fort Niagara would exchange hands and become a part of the English, become an English post. So what is trade silver? I think we talked about it a little bit. It's these things. But to make a point of saying that trade silver isn't all encompassing as a term, like it's actually any kind of high polished metal. So it could be brass, tin, pewter, but silver is even today the most highly sought after and valued of all of those metals. And it was also even more highly sought after by indigenous groups than among Haudenosaunee anyway than gold. And I thought that was interesting. And I remember seeing I wish I could find that quote because I remember reading it somewhere about why silver was more valued than gold among indigenous silversmiths or Haudenosaunee ones anyway. But an old Haudenosaunee silversmith just said that he preferred silver because it's the color of clouds. And I thought that was really nice. I guess just the white reflection of the metal just had that aesthetic value that just gold was not going to have for them. I think it was just the whiteness of it, because that color and that gleam and that shine isn't something that you're going to find too much in nature. And so it was something that would really pop out to the eyes of somebody who doesn't see a lot of metallic objects from day to day. And so so the white to this Haudenosaunee silversmith, it said to him it looked like the color of clouds. And so, like I was saying before, it was up to the fur traders to really decide and determine, what and figure out what was going to trade among the various indigenous groups. It wasn't just Haudenosaunee people that we're talking about. A prolific number of northeastern indigenous groups, and again, what might have been highly valued by one group might not be of any value to another. So it was a lot of figuring out at these trading posts. Being in Europe and deciding, oh, okay, I'm going to invest in a ton of trade silver and bring it to the New World to sell it to indigenous groups. I sure hope I buy something that they like. That's a lot of what it was. It was learning that. And the interesting part about it now is that a lot of that figuring out that was happening by traders at that time period determined a lot of what we value in our regalia today. So these styles here, this Luckenbooth design that I have in the picture on this slide, that is almost distinctly Haudenosaunee. It's a Luckenbooth brooch, and they're Scottish in their origins. But I just thought that was really, really interesting, just that when you see these, they're actually really distinctly Haudenosaunee. Of all trade silver, like Haudenosaunee loved hearts, and they were the ones that you were going to see wearing hearts. A lot of the times, not, again, it's not 100% the case, but it was the case that, if you're seeing somebody wearing a woman wearing a top and it's covered in hearts, she's more than likely Haudenosaunee as opposed to any other tribe. Yeah. And then, so trade, to be specific, trade silver and Haudenosaunee silversmithing categories are different. So what silversmiths make today aren't 100% the same as what they were in the trade silver era, but they are related. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Haudenosaunee silversmithing later. But basically, you can break up trade silver categories fundamentally into 6 categories. So you have that Scottish Luckenbooth, this style, the effigies of animals, Masonic designs, the zodiac, which is a star. And this number 5, hunting, where it says bow, arrow, spear, or canoe, I've heard of that one, but for the life of me, I could not find a picture to represent it. Not to say that there isn't any out there, but just for some reason, when I was creating this presentation, I'm like, I can't find a trade silver piece that looks like a spear or a canoe, but it is a category. And, I hope to add a picture here when I have more time, or when I'm able to pursue that further. And then also the cross, which was something that was prolific, and it wasn't always faith-based when it came to the cross. So in Christian and non-Christian indigenous groups wore crosses. Everybody did. But for Christian groups, it would have been a representative of their religion and their faith. But for non-Christian groups, it was just the value. Like, it's just like a big piece of silver. They're very highly valued. They would get 15 inches. very large pieces that you would have, that you would adorn yourself with. And again, it's just that carrying around of wealth, of your physical wealth on your piece. So crosses were of high value for any Indigenous person. And so let me see here. Oh, and also pointing out that even during the trade silver era, even though I consider it different from the Haudenosaunee silversmithing, bearing in mind that Native people were also creating their own trade silver pieces at this point too. And they were emulating pieces based off of what they were seeing among the trade silver designs, and they would try to figure them out in their own way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, about what kind of, what you're going to find the difference between trade silver and Indian silver is what they would call it. Yeah. So again, when you're going through that trade silver era, I thought this was really interesting that I came across, because you can almost timestamp it. See that July 15th, 1703. The value of what some trade silver was, if you're going to be an Indigenous person going to a Hudson's Bay Company post. And so see this picture of this beaver that's like it's like an effigy. It's like I can't remember the word for it. It's like a bangle, like you would wear them and tie them to your garments, and people would wear tons of them. But they're very popular. There's turtles, bears, and otters were some of the very popular ones. And they would get from 3 to 8 inches in length, so they can get fairly large. But these prices of goods to the right here was giving a sense that, in 1703, this was the value of one of these pieces. So at the very top, you have a trade beaver, which is 3.4 inches in length. The value of that would be half a prime buck or 1 damaged pelt in season. Yeah, but when I say buck or doe in this context, they're not talking about deer. I think they're talking about beavers. So 2 trade beavers at 3/4 of length, 1 prime doe in season. It means 1 prime female beaver in season. And so I thought it was really neat to just be able to see, like we do have it in values in 1703, like what the Hudson's Bay Company was selling these trade silver pieces at. And when you realize like the amount of, I think Hudson's Bay Company at one point, the trade silver brooches, I guess non-specific, like the circular design ones, they were valuing them at 1 shilling a piece. And so when you think that, okay, a brooch was considered 1 shilling, and then you would have a woman, like there's recordings of women literally having hundreds of these brooches on the front face of their dresses. Like you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of shillings, like that, like just to get an idea of how valuable some of the garments are that some of these Haudenosaunee women are just walking around in, and they're just wearing from day to day. Like, an idea of how valuable they get and how much work and effort in terms of collecting beaver pelts was in order to keep up this fashion. And so, like I was talking about before, trade silver and Haudenosaunee silver work, they're not the same thing, but they are related. So Haudenosaunee silver work today is an evolution of trade silver. So the trade silver here that I have listed from 1 to 6, that is, that was on a previous slide. So you saw that already. Luck and Booth, Effigy, Masonic, Zodiac, Hunting, and the Cross. To the right, you have Haudenosaunee silver work, which is that simple disc, ornate disc, star, heart, square, and Masonic. And those are kind of like the basic principal designs that you're going to see when Haudenosaunee people are doing classic Haudenosaunee work. This is what they're working from. And then we're going to noon, right? I got so much to do. Okay. Yeah, I got so much to do. I got so much to share. But I'm just going to kind of blow through these anyway. I was going to read some accounts, but I'm going to try to mosey on here in terms of what I'm talking about, so that we have time to finish. But these pictures, I thought they were just brilliant. Being able to see artist sketches or accounts of how silver was being worn by Haudenosaunee people. You have this man on the right with a scalp lock, and he just has his trade brooches like pierced through his braid, and that's how he's wearing them to weigh them down on one side. On the left, you have this man wearing, he's wearing a nose ring. He has trade silver brooches that are like clipped into each other, and they're from his ear, and they're hanging all the way down to his chest. Those are all the brooches. Those are gorgets, it's armbands that he's wearing on his side. And so I do have some quotes that I wanted to share, but I'm going to try to move on because the pictures are good as well. And so, like I was saying before, that dress to the right is a Haudenosaunee woman's dress, and Let me see if I can find that over here. Oh, and again, look, you're looking at hundreds of brooches on one dress, and you know that they're valuing them at roughly $1 at one point. And so these dresses, they can be worth, you know, up to 30 pounds, which is an incredible amount at that time. And to the left here, these are they earrings or are they nose rings? The answer is they're both. And so on the left, you have all these earrings, but what you see is an earring with a long rope that's meant to be clipped to the nose. So these are pieces that were like expand or crossing the expanse of a person's face. And also men and women were both practiced slitting their ears and their earlobes. So you would have men that would, like, you know, how they stretch earlobes. They would stretch them very far, but to the point where like their earlobes were actually like touching their shoulders. And there was even some cases where like their ears like would rip apart from just becoming too stretched, but they would actually take copper or brass or silver wire and wire their ears back together, so that they can keep wearing these adornments. Like they went really far with how they were kind of using silver in terms of their intrinsic values. There's a couple quotes here I want to share, because I'm always told that like we just don't have accounts a lot of how Haudenosaunee women dressed pre-contact or before the mid 1800s. But I did find a couple quotes that I thought were interesting, and I wanted to, I'll read those. An account by Colonel Proctor in 1791, he said, "The village of 28 cabins was typical of the Iroquois. The inhabitants were well clothed, particularly the women. Some were dressed very richly, and their clothing ornamented with so many silver trappings that one suit must have been at a value of at least 30 pounds. So a significant amount of money." And then this second account by Elkanah Watson, who witnessed the treaty at Fort Stanwix in 1788, because there was women present at that council as well. The account goes that the women were dressed in silks, fine scarlet clothes bordered with gold fringe, a profusion of brooches, rings in their noses, their ears slit, and their heads decorated with feathers. And which I find interesting, because you see recreations, like pictures, people that kind of, you know, they do paintings of the time period, but you're never seeing the women dress actually drawn like that, with their ears being slit or wearing nose rings. And so, but there is first person accounts that are saying that this was the case, that they slit their ears in the same way that the men did. So another continuation of that account, the women wore petticoats reaching a little below the knee. Some wore garments of printed linen or cotton of various colors, decorated at the breast with a great number of silver buckles, which are also worn by some as ornaments upon their petticoats. They adorned their ears, necks, and breasts with small crosses, little round escutcheons, I think I'm saying that right, and crescents made either of silver or wampum. I'm trying to blast through this here. These next couple slides, I won't spend a lot of time on, other than to say that gorgets were and are a thing, like pre-contact, post-contact. And we don't know, gorgets and medals, like medallions, were presented to indigenous people, and it wasn't clear in the beginning why, but we do understand it based on, based on the provenance of certain gorgets. So Joseph Brant, like the reasons he was given a gorget is largely the reason why we understand the purpose of gorgets were. And so like he's wearing one that has the insignia of George III on it. It was presented to him for his service in the English army. So we do have some reasons as to why like Haudenosaunee people wore military gorgets. They didn't just pick it up or buy it and pick it up off the ground and realize, oh, this looks nice, I'll wear it. Like a lot of it was because they had some kind of a value personally to the owner, and
prestige as well.
Yeah,
it was looked at as prestige and leadership, because at the time British military, it was officers who were presented with awards that wore these gorgets. Historically, gorgets are their body armor. That's where they come from, but they evolved into a form of prestige. So they could be awarded or represent rank. And Joseph Brant was a captain in the British Army, and he was given a lot of this prestige because he was a Mohawk person who actually led a lot of Mohawk people. So he is looked at as a representative of Britain amongst the Mohawk people. So there are a lot. He does have multiple portraits of him wearing these gorgets.
And so these are in the bottom left there too. That's an example of a French style gorget. So you can see a French one is more of like a crescent moon shaped, whereas the English style that Joseph Brant is wearing is like, I don't know what the word is, but
It's very round. It's crescent and it's more convexed. So the round, it's bulging outwards. It's convexed. So, but the French ones on the inside is more of a flat sheet plate that's bent a little bit in the form of the lower neck. And then it's just not as crescent as the English gorgets. So you can tell the difference between a French and an English gorget.
yeah. And so the style on the left that Joseph Brant's wearing on the left, that gorget he's wearing, even though we wore shell pre-contact, I'm under the impression that wearing a full shell like that might have been after something that was adopted after Indigenous people started seeing military men wearing gorgets, and they wanted to imitate them, that style. But you know, if they didn't have metal available, they were going to make it out of shell. So I'm like, I have a feeling that that's probably what the aesthetic came from with this shell that Joseph's wearing in this picture. And it's also pierced with metal. Like you can see, it's probably brass that is pierced with in order to just be able to hang it onto clothing. But so metals, it's the same way. We don't know early on the purpose of metals, but eventually over time in history, we do have an idea of why they were gifted to people, to serve as badges to recognize a person as being a friendly Indian, to attach specific Indians to interests of specific colonies. So again, that would be like your Joseph Brant. He did wear, even in that image we just saw, a George III medallion. And so they're tying him to the interests of British colonies, to commemorate services rendered, to secure services or neutrality of an Indigenous group when, depending on a colony's need during war. That one is particularly important to me because early on, somebody like Sir William Johnson, who was the first superintendent of Indian Affairs in North America, for the English, he understood right away how important gifting was. And so he did a lot of it. And the thing that's important to remember about gifting, because we even do it today as an Indigenous people, we do a lot of gifting and giving and giveaway ceremony. Everybody has some form of giveaway ceremony. But the reason why we do that is because it's deriving itself from a culture where there is no written word. So when European people sign a treaty, signing the piece of paper is what's important. But for the Indigenous groups, the gifting is what was important, because gifting is creating physical evidence that something happened. So when a medal is given to an Indigenous person, it's to them, it meant that something happened, and it's a physical object representing some kind of a truth. And that's what wampum belts are as well, when those are exchanged to gift. So that's a really important piece right there when talking about the value of medals and why they were used. To commemorate acts of valor, that's popular even today, and then as a form of authentication of treaties agreed on.
Okay, so to get a little bit, this is Jessie speaking now, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about silver as a metal in general, just coming from this the scientific side of things. So basically on planet Earth and in the universe as we know it, there are two different types of metal. There's ferrous metals, which have iron content, which iron is a pure element. And then there's non-ferrous metals, which is any other metal. Silver being a non-ferrous metal, as well as gold, copper, any other elements that don't have iron in them. So what's great, that's what gives precious metals like silver and gold so much value. It's not just because there's only so much of it in the planet. There's only so much gold that we have access to it, as well as silver, they were given value because they're so limited, and they're just beautiful metals in general when they're developed. So pure silver is a soft metal, especially copper and gold. They're all soft metals. They don't need heat to be formed. So with iron, you have to be a blacksmith to form iron into iron tools or iron appliances like kettles and whatnot. You have to have a forge to make those. They have to be red hot, and you need to hammer it into that object. But silver, and just as much on the copper side of this presentation we talked about in the beginning, you can, these metals are soft. They can be formed with rocks and they're really very easily manipulated, and they shine up so well. They're just beautiful, and they turn into jewelry over time. So today, fine silver isn't used too much other than bullion. So for monetary value, people store it. Sterling silver is what we use today. The reason why we have sterling silver, and there's even other types of alloy like coin silver, argentium silver. Copper, our silver is a very soft metal. So it is alloyed with other metals to make it into sterling silver. So whenever you see jewelry today, if it's stamped 925, you'll see it 0.925. That means that it has a 92.5% silver content in it. So depending on the manufacturer and where that sterling silver came from, it could be copper or nickel that it's alloyed with. It's like a recipe, depending on that manufacturers won't share. Like you can't just find out how much copper or nickel is in your sterling silver. You just know that it's sterling silver from the manufacturer. So yeah, sometimes you'll see sterling in a stamp, like my stamp, when I stamp my work, it says sterling, but I know that it's 92.925, 92.5% silver content in that piece. Yeah, so we're gonna get a little more into contemporary works. So I have some artists that are from Six Nations territory, where me and Dakota hail from. Haudenosaunee Silversmith. Come from. So, so this picture on the left here is a more contemporary single crown heart by Anthony Green, and it does have that really classic design from 17th century or 18th century silversmith or silverwork. So he put that pin back on the top. So a lot of the times when you see artists made by a trade silver inspired piece by hand, if you look at the pin on the front that's meant to be worn through a garment, a lot of the times they put that on there and it's not functional. Like this, from this looking at this picture, it looks like just a piece of wire that's soldered down just to give it that trade silver look, even though there might be just a more modern pin back on the back. You do see that with contemporary works. Like I have a pendant personally that's made by one of my favorite silversmiths. Her name's Audrey Merkel, and it has a pin back soldered on the front of it just for aesthetic, not for use, just to give it that historical context to it. So from like the Luck and Booth era that we were talking about with the designs earlier, a lot of, you can tell that this is Haudenosaunee made because it has eagle heads on the bottom, and just to give it a more of a indigenous representation by the artist. There's lots of hearts on it as well. We add hearts as much as we can, it seems like, Haudenosaunee people, even though the whole concept of this piece is a heart. So that's made by Anthony Green. This is Chief Levi Joe from the Onondaga Nation, and he's there's a lot of documentation, or there's some essays written of accounts of his work. What I want to like to talk about is his bench that's right in front of us. So he's working outside, it's in daylight. So, you know, in those days, they would probably be working by candle or lantern light. So he's got his workbench sitting outside, and his work in these essays, he says that he learned his craft from his grandfather. So he probably didn't have the ability to solder. He might have by using blow soldering techniques. But just by looking at this picture, I can see all the little hand tools that even I use today. He's using, he's got a steel block, he's got a hammer. He's probably hammering down silver coins because he inherited his techniques from his grandfather, which would have been at least 1800s, where they would have been learning. He's probably hammering down silver coins to a flat enough so that he can get it to a polished method. And instead of a drill, like I use a flex shaft today, which is a powered drill to drill all my holes, he's probably using owls or just plain hammering a nail through or a center punch just to make those holes, and then using files to get into his pieces. Yeah, so we already touched a little bit on this, but for Haudenosaunee work, this is kind of what we see from historically and in contemporary context.
Like I was saying before, that classic trade silver, true trade silver definitely has its own classifications, and Haudenosaunee style ornamental patterns definitely come from trade silver, but they are intrinsically different as well too. So these are the 6 principal ornamental patterns that you're going to see from Haudenosaunee silversmiths who are building onto classic Haudenosaunee design. And so, but yeah, go ahead. So these ones right here, that piece that Jesse was talking about earlier, that Anthony Green, it's actually a replica, because I found that same piece and it's here in like that top middle design. See, it's the exact same picture. So I know that Anthony Green was creating his pieces based off of other designs that he had seen. I think he was creating replicas. And so the symbology or symbolism here, again, Jesse was mentioning the eagles and the hearts, and but you notice on this piece too that there's 5 hearts, and so that might mean to the original creator of that to represent the 5 original nations, the 5 nations. And then in the middle of the forehead of this heart is because it also looks like an owl, an effigy of an owl. There's a sun. So to me, it just looks like, you know, if you're trying to understand or what the symbolism might be that the silversmith is trying to impart onto you, it might be like the sun is shining onto the 5 nations and they're being guarded by the double eagle. And so all of these, something to understand about symbolism, like when we go through and look at trades like silver that's created by Haudenosaunee people, and like, you know, what do the various designs represent? Try to remember that there is no set meaning for all of these things. Like there's no rule that says, there's no book out there that says that this means that and this means this. Like it ultimately came down to what's meaningful to the silversmith and to the person that wants to wear that design. So who they're creating it for. A lot of these are hearts, again, you see, again, just the intrinsic style. And like the top left design right there, where it looked like that classic Luckenbooth trade heart, but you'll notice that the top of it's kind of more rigid as opposed to soft, the way the Luckenbooths were. It's because they removed the crown and they added these rigid pieces that are meant to represent antlers. So those are actually antlers from a Gustoa, a Haudenosaunee, like a chief's Gustoa. So that could be looked at as a brooch that's designed for a chief. And the same thing to the ones to the right. There's so much to talk about. We're trying to wrap up for give you guys time to answer questions. The far one to the right, I thought I'll mention is interesting, is it's a marriage brooch. The top of it is a bear holding a war club, and the bottom of it is a wolf with a war club created out of its tail. And then you see a human profile effigy on it as well. So brooches were created for very custom reasons as well. That's a marriage brooch. And then these crosses on the bottom. I just wanted to make the point of saying that the Iroquois made crosses elaborate and the white made crosses simple, because the Iroquois was creating a piece that was meaningful and intentional for a specific person, but the white one was being made to manufacture quickly and to sell quickly. But trying to blast through all this.
So just a few more artists that are from Six Nations territory. So this is Arthur Paulus. I think this was taken in the 80s, this picture of him. But just like any jewelers today, for the most part, when a jeweler hallmarks their work, when they do their stamp, it usually there's letters like initials or numbers even to represent their company. Like in the United Kingdom today, you have to register your hallmark, and they're always represented by numbers and letters. But in across Native America, our hallmarks are typically made from symbols. So Arthur Paulus, he was Onondaga from the Eel clan, and his marker down on the left-hand corner is a picture of an eel, so to represent his clan. And this is all his work made from inspired, yeah, made from sheet metal, and it's all inspired from trade silver designs. Even on his bench, you can see there's a white piece of paper on his workbench where you can see that he cut out some pieces of designs from pieces of paper and glued it down onto sheet metal, and then he's cutting and filing from that. The next one. So this is Floating Canoe. Like, he's a very famous silversmith as well. He so his name's Elwood Green, but everybody knows him as Floating Canoe. If you have a floating canoe ring or a piece, then you're very lucky to have that. So his stamp hallmark was a picture of a canoe in water to represent his Ohswé name, Floating Canoe. So these are some of his works. He was inspired by trade silver. He has this the brooch on the very right has like a leaf motif in it, which was pretty commonly used, but you don't see it too often in contemporary works. There's also Anthony Green, who is Floating Canoe's son. His stamp marker up on the right-hand corner, there's his hallmark was represented with 3 cattails. So he stamped 3 times with cattails. So that's his marker, and you know it's Anthony Green's work. And these are some of his pieces on the bottom. This is a profile of some of my work. So when I stamp my work, I stamp the metal content as well. So I have sterling with the Sapling and Flint, like our trademarker. I have so I put in the metal content. So I do use 10 karat, 14 karat, and even 18 karat gold, and I'll put in the metal content. These are some of the trade silver that I've made in recent years. And yeah, that's the work that me and Dakota do.
Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
All right, just bang on 11:45. We give it 15 minutes for questions. That was the plan.
Thank you so much, Dakota and Jesse, for the amazing presentation. We can't thank you enough. I know we've had an encore of amazing comments saying thank you for your presentation. And I guess we'll jump into questions right away because we received a lot of them. So I'll start with Spencer, who asked the first question for today. He says, Kwe, I'm a jewelry maker as well from Ganawage. I was wondering if you do casting. I presently send my casting work to a refinery, but if you can do it, I would like to do business with your company.
That is a goal of ours. So
it's on the to-do list.
Yeah, a lot of our designs we send for casting as well to Toronto. We have our handmade pieces and our custom work, but a lot of our smaller designs are from casting, and we send them to Toronto. But in the near future, we're hoping to offer casting services. It is a goal of for our business that we're creating arts-based jobs in our community around this jewelry.
It's in the
economy
business model, so keep a lookout for it.
Yeah, keep a lookout for it.
Thank you so much for the answer. We'll be sure to put Dakota and Jesse's coordinates in the chat for you, Spencer, if you want to connect with them directly for the future. So you'll have that. We have Margaret, who says, I could happily watch you silversmith all day. Do you happen to give classes?
It's in the business model.
Yeah, we are growing as a business. We have a studio, and I do have 2 students that I'm training right now. Right now, I work with high school students specifically because I'm hoping that we will have we're making this opportunity for young people to thrive as artists. We have very creative youth, but a lot of the times you'll see a lot of our youth are going off and doing more like social work and just more departmental type works where they end up working for their local municipalities or companies,
and then they keep themselves sane by doing beadwork.
Yeah, exactly. But
they want to do art.
Yeah, they're doing beadwork on the side, even in college, right? But so I do have a couple of students right now, but in the future we're hoping we want to build a bigger studio. So right now we have a studio with 2 benches amongst our other equipment. But our future goal within the next 3 to 5 years, we want to build a 10-bench studio. And yes, I will be giving classes. That's the goal with growing our business, is to train and keep revitalizing Haudenosaunee Silverwork in Grand River, especially.
That is great. Thank you so much. We have Megan next asking, may I ask how they would extract the copper from these boulders? And if necessary, how they would purify it?
They wouldn't have found it in mine. So copper would have been, any metals would have been just found like in riverbeds, places of high irrigation. There wasn't mining done.
There was, but it's not going to be like a little tiny.
The mining as we know it.
Mining would be like, oh, I found a rock on the ground and let me just dig around it a little bit, and that was our mining.
Yeah, kind of like how people pan for gold and find gold nuggets in a river. That's places of high irrigation is where metal would have been found. That's why the Great Lakes Territory has.
You can find caches of old they call them Indian copper mines, like around the northeast. If you actually look it up, it's actually they're pretty touristy. You can actually find a couple that you can go visit, like ancient Indian copper mines, they'll call them. But it is essentially like open face, like they wasn't around, they were kind of digging around it. And for the most part, they wouldn't have been doing separation of metals. But the copper, the reason why it's so valuable even today, native copper, is the fact that it's just so pure coming out of the ground. Like that was really like, they're fortunate about that, because they wouldn't have been doing any kind of they didn't have crucibles, they didn't do soldering, they didn't use molten metal of any type, so there was no separation of metal.
It would have been nice and soft too, because it's pure and it's unalloyed. Like sterling silver is harder than fine silver because it's a good alloy that can be manipulated easily and not kind of fall apart or dent. So if you wear fine silver jewelry, it's going to get scratched and lose its luster pretty quickly and oxidize as well. That's the scientific side of metallurgy. Alloys work because they work for the process of jewelry, and it keeps its luster as well and doesn't oxidize. Silver is will oxidize like crazy if it's not alloyed into sterling or argentium silver as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that answer. We have next, Sandra is asking, in traditional copper jewelry, is the green tarnish used also as a decorative element, or is it kept all shiny?
Based on black.
Yeah, I like to keep it clean myself. Like we can't really know what people liked pre-contact, because what we know is just what's coming out of the ground, and it's gonna have some oxidization to it. Again, it's just all about aesthetic value at the end of the day. Some people like the look of oxidized copper and will keep it for that value of it. And or some people just like it pure and will polish it. So, but we can't know specifically pre-contact what they enjoyed or preferred about it.
Yeah, we don't see copper really amongst our people today. People do use it because it just costs a lot less than silver. Silver is pretty pricey. If you get to go buy a sheet of sterling silver, you're spending a couple $100. Copper you can get at a hardware store and make, you know,
Get a sheet like this. For
yeah,
$1.
you can make metal jewelry out of copper.
Mhm.
But for the most part, we like things shiny. I want to say, Haudenosaunee people, we keep it shiny. Copper patina. There are decorative techniques to patina copper, and a lot of Canadian artists use that patina process. But I think historically we liked it shiny.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded again of that quote, and it's bothering me because I can't remember where I read it, but it was an ancient silversmith or older silversmith, so early 1800s, was quoted as saying he preferred to work with silver than gold because it was the color of clouds. But to me that represented like polished silver, so high finished silver, plus the idea of polishing silver, the silver chain covenant. There's a lot of representation there of it being polished, it being important to be polished. It reminds me that maybe that has some pre-contact or ancestral ideation there as well too. Like maybe copper had to have been highly polished for our people as well. And so, but again, like we can't really know because we only know about native copper based on what we find in archaeological sites. And so nobody's there to tell us what was the preference.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another question by Linda, who asks, how was copper wire made originally?
Mm-hmm. Again, those earrings that design that I had mentioned had a picture of, and there was a quote by Beecham saying that the earliest earrings were likely copper wire that was coiled up and flattened. And so, and I think that the reason why it would be flattened is just because it would have been difficult for them to create, you know, you can create wire, it's possible, but it would have been very difficult for them to create, you know, very fine, even wire. So
what I think it was is that they would have took a long piece, like a kind of an ingot shaped piece, and they would have hammered it with something as well as they can. Like there's not a lot of information as to how it was done, but I think it would have been pounded to look like a wire as much as possible, and it probably would have been like a flat wire. Wire doesn't just mean a round thing, it can be square as well. At the end of that piece, the picture that we've seen, it all looks flat in the etching that was done. So they would have just did as best as possible to make a round wire. Like nowadays we use drawing plates to make wire. Like if I make wire, I have to start it as an ingot and roll it down into a square because I can only make it out of my rolling wheel as square. And then I put it into a drawing plate. I have to pull it down into a round wire.
I try to remember too that wire, I'm like, wouldn't have focused on something that we didn't have a lot of need for. Like, did we have a lot of need for copper wire other than to create some finer jewelry out of it? Maybe, but I'm just not sure myself off the top of my head. So like the need for very precision wire might not have been the same then that it would be necessarily for us when we think about, how do they make wire? Like they probably didn't think to make it in the same way that we would based on the need for it.
Thank you. I see your hand up, Suzanne. I'll just come back to you. I'll read some earlier questions we had in the chat. Michelle, also thank you for putting the address of Sapling and Flint in the chat for everyone. So we have our next question by Liliana, who asks, did the different tribes exchange silver-made items amongst each other? Did they copy from each other, or each tribe had their own types?
Oh yeah. Yeah. The important thing too is to say that our trade routes existed pre-contact.
Yeah.
They were always there. The reason we know little about it is because how Native people related and traded with each other was of little value to Europeans. So they're not going to focus on or write down, well, how do Indians hang out with each other? The most that we would know is that they wanted to know if we liked each other, was for the most part what they understood about our trade. But that being said, like
Trade was very common amongst us.
like those serrated copper bracelets that we had pictures of, like they almost looked exactly the same, but one of them was in Seneca territory and the other one was from Oneida territory. And so trade was definitely occurring and taking place. And gifting, wampum, there's prolific wampum belt exchanges between Anishinaabe, Algonquin, Haudenosaunee people all up and down the Northeast coast, which is that evidence of the fact that we had to have a relationship with each other. And a lot of it was built around trade and being able to have access to materials that we might not have in our territory, but maybe
trade still happens today as well. It's important to remember artists do trade. All the wampum shell that I have, I trade it with people. Like I'll trade sometimes tools, or even some of my silver pieces just for 10 pieces or 10 shells. I don't have the best access to them. I can get them even on eBay, but I would prefer to get it through those old timey methods. So even today, trade happens. And yeah, so some of my designs are actually out east because I traded some of my silver for my designs for wampum shell.
Thank you so much. Suzanne, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Dakota and Jesse, you're more than welcome to go ahead.
Yes, First Ladies, I could listen to you guys all day, and I really hope you consider doing some more presentations for MCLL that I can tune into. Also, my question was more for MCLL personnel. I see this is being recorded. Will you let us know how we can review, re-listen to this? Because there was so much information. I need to listen to this again.
Absolutely. That's a bit more a question for us.
Exactly.
I'll be putting our email address in the chat at the end of the presentation, and anybody who wants the full recording of the event, we can share it with you. Just send us a quick email so we can make sure to add you to the list of the people we'll be sharing the recording with.
Can I just step in for, I know we love acronyms. MCLL, for those of you who heard that, stands for the McGill Community of Lifelong Learning, which is under our unit. So I think Jesse and Dakota were not familiar with that acronym, and others as well.
I'm a lifelong learner, so I fall under that.
We have just one more question from David, who asks, can you tell us about the jewelry you're currently wearing around your neck?
Ooh, I made them. So these are a couple of our designs. So this is a little lacrosse stick pendant. So it's meant to look like a woody stick, a traditional woody lacrosse stick. So I do make them in silver and gold. We have a whole collection of sticks. So we do have a more modern, like the Tupperware looking sticks, the old school like stick ball sticks.
Yeah. We cast these products, but Jesse actually keeps and wears the original.
Yeah, I do have I think it might be on our YouTube channel. I did make a video of me making the original. So this piece, it was actually, man, there's got to be at least 20 solder joints in there because I used 2 different gauges of wire. And it's really tedious because when you're soldering one piece of metal, a smaller piece of metal onto a thicker piece, you have to evenly heat all of it to melt the solder, and you don't want to melt and ruin the smaller piece. So I was able to get a little ball in there as well. So the ball is I took a wire and I put my solder torch onto it and just heated it until it melted up into a ball, and it just dropped down. And then I took that, put a little solder on it, and then I soldered it into the lacrosse stick. So on our website, when we sell them, they are castings, but I make the originals by hand. So this piece took me about 40 hours just to make this, to make it to my standard of how I want it to look in a casting. We also have the Haudenosaunee Confederacy belt. So Dakota and Dakota are both wearing one, and we wear them all the time. I like to pair them up. I like to wear 2 chains. Like I always have a gold chain on because I like gold. It's value to me. Like I invest in it. I have gold bars. I understand metal more than like buying stocks. You know, that's where I'll make my investments. So that's what this is. So Dakota as well is wearing that, and both of these are available on our website. I made my ring as well. You can see this is it's an 18 karat gold, I guess a wedding ring, and it's inlaid with turquoise. So I inlaid my rings with turquoise and wampum. I've had requests for white wampum, like I'll do that as well, but I made that by hand. So there's that. Oh, and this is just a sterling silver band that I made. Oh, and this is my favorite cuff my husband bought for me. This was made by Levi Platero. So he's a Navajo silversmith we got down in New Mexico. So that's Navajo for you. His bracelet is called The Daily Life of a Navajo, and it's a man on a farm. So it's really neat. It's what he's Pueblo actually. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
It's all on our website, and Instagram is probably our biggest social media. We have Facebook too, but we're bigger.
TikTok too.
And TikTok.
We're on the
we're trying to
tickety talk. Yeah.
Yeah. So for everyone interested in Dakota and Jesse's products, I've just reshared their website and their YouTube channels in the chat, and feel free to go there. They have their Instagram links and any of their social media platforms there too.
Our gallery is a little different context too. Like our gallery has like my handmade pieces. So these were made right from the ingot. These aren't available on our website because our gallery, the goal of our gallery is to have our higher end $10,000 pieces. So what's on the website isn't necessarily what's in our store. So if you come to Six Nations, come please visit our gallery. We're trying to make the finer things. Or we keep these.
keep them in a nice box
Yeah.
with our logo on it.
Yeah. So there's that as well.
So, thank you so much, Jesse, Dakota. Thank you so much. I could tell how passionate you are. I know that the time is up, and there are still a few questions. If you can stay a few more minutes and answer maybe some questions that individuals may have. I know others have to leave because they have other commitments, but I want to really take a little time to acknowledge the time that you took away from your business, because I know you're in your store. So thank you for that, and thank you for everyone else who participated in coming in and listening in and to this presentation. And as Sandra Wood put down in the chat, is that there isn't enough of this kind of information in school curriculum. And so thank you so much for filling in the gap and sharing the history of Indigenous contribution to the land and into smithing as well. So for those of you who want to stay a few more minutes, thank you very much. Antoine, thank you for facilitating, and I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Yeah.
And
So
asking if we're going to be at Kahnawake Powwow, and the answer is yes.
We will be at the Kahnawake Powwow.
Yeah, we're there every year.
there you go. That was one of the big questions. I think many people want to support your work, and so they're asking if you're coming down closer to Montreal at any point from Six Nations. So there you go. Thank you for that answer. If I've missed any questions, please feel free to recopy them in the chat if you want to stay for a couple minutes. But for anyone else who's been attending, we're mindful of the time. Thank you all for coming. We'll let you go, and we hope you have a beautiful day. And we'll stay a couple minutes with Dakota and Jesse to answer some final questions. Thank you, everyone.
Antoine, do you want to stop the recording?
Yeah.
Thank you.